Make your marks.
You're listening to the Pullbuoy Podcast.
Hello, Steve here, back with another edition of the Pullbuoy Podcast. We're almost at the end of 2022, but there's still racing to be done as the team from Great Britain will head to the World Short Course Championship soon. We've got one of the team members from that team on this edition of the podcast. We'll be speaking to Bella Hindley shortly. Just a quick plug though, you may have seen on my social media, there's a new store on Pullbuoy. You can find it at pullbuoy.co.uk/store. So check that out for some swimming themed t-shirts, hoodies, etc. But without further ado, let's speak to Bella. So my guest today on the Pullbuoy Podcast is one of the newer faces in the GB team from this year. Pleased to welcome Bella Hindley. Hello, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. Now, 2022 has been a bit of a breakthrough year for you. How's it felt? You know, what's your view of the year so far?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. Lots of people kind of have described it that way as well. And in lots of interviews at Commonwealth, they were kind of like, "You've come out of nowhere." It's like, well, I have sort of been here around, around the place. But yeah, no, it was definitely a big kind of breakout onto the GB in England swimming scene for me this year. So yeah, super happy with the results and so excited now to kind of continue that momentum into the next year and hopefully year and a half, 2 years.
So, I mean, you say you've been around for a while, and you know people who are intense swimming anoraks will have seen your career developing, and we'll touch more on that in a minute. But you're 26 this year, I think. Is that right?
Yeah, turned 26 in October. Yeah.
So that's swimming has tended to be a younger person sport, especially for women. So did you think perhaps your chance to make that breakout had passed you by, especially with the events of the last few years, which we'll come back to?
Oh, completely. Oh, definitely. Like so many times throughout, lockdown, and I'm sure we'll get into all of that kind of stuff. But so many times throughout that, I was ready to be done. Not because I didn't enjoy the sport anymore, but more because the kind of circumstances and situations didn't really allow me to keep going. So I never really thought I'd kind of still be doing the sport at this age. So I also have lots of other goals outside of swimming that I wanted to get started and get going with. But opportunities come around when they do, and you've kind of got to go for it and jump on them when it happens. So that's kind of been, a big theme throughout my swimming career. And I am obviously 26 now, and I have been in this sport for quite a while, but I have traveled and trained in different places. So that's also why I haven't necessarily been on the GB swimming scene for that long.
All right, well, let's rewind a bit then and take a little journey through your swimming career, as it were. So you swam in London at Brompton before you headed to the US, and you obviously went to university over there at Yale. Now Yale clearly has its academic attractions, but it may not be people's first choice when they're thinking of a swimming university. Were you going there with swimming in mind, or was swimming a route to help you find a place at a US university? I mean, where were you hoping to get to?
Yeah, that's a good question. I feel like I haven't been asked about this in quite a while because it was so long ago now. But yeah, so thinking back to that time, so I knew I always wanted to go to the US because it had kind of the best, in my opinion, the best combination of athletics and academics. And so it'd always been on my mind that I wanted to go there. And then when I started the whole recruiting process, which to a British person is so overwhelming because I had no idea when these kind of deadlines were coming up, and it's all quite stressful. There's like one particular date and all the coaches can start calling you, and I was getting all these random calls at different, like in the evening because of time difference, and that was quite overwhelming. But so yeah, when I was going through the recruiting process, I was, like you kind of touched on, considering those super intense swimming schools that probably may have projected my career in a completely different direction. But for me, I put a lot of time and effort into my academics throughout my schooling career. I went to quite an intense school in London. And so I always knew, and also I want to be a doctor. So that's kind of the next stage of my career as well. So I knew I wanted a university that would kind of best allow me to pursue both of those goals simultaneously, which is not an easy thing to do either. And so I started looking at the Ivy League, and for me, that was kind of the best combination of both. Also, getting to go to an incredible university. So, then when it was narrowing down between like Harvard, Princeton, Yale, all those kind of schools, for me, it just came down to kind of the team culture and the coach and the environment that I thought I would work best in. But I know it's also, Yale is not necessarily a school that most people think straight away of as like a swimming school. But I also think it's important to find out like what suits you best, and what's the best environment that you're going to find you kind of progress the most in. So yeah, that's a long-winded way of saying that's why I chose Yale. But yeah.
I mean, I don't think people would say you shouldn't have gone to Yale. Clearly, given lots of benefits to it. I mean, how did you find the swimming though? I mean, it's still, you still get the dual meets and the conferences and everything, and you had a load of success at sort of Ivy League conference level. I mean, how did you find the whole environment and that kind of racing culture, if you like?
Yeah, I loved it. I mean, as a sprinter, like I just love racing. I love competition. So dual meets were so fun, especially as like when you obviously start off your short course yards career, you're just going best times all the time. So that's pretty fun. But I just loved getting up and racing and competing. So that straight away was a really good kind of environment for me. And then also, this was something I did also consider, whether you want to be kind of like that big fish in a smaller pond or a small fish in a big pond. And I feel like I definitely wasn't a big fish. It was a big pond. It ended up being a big pond. So I was lucky to have that success at the Ivy League Championships throughout my 4 years. But it wasn't like I also didn't have a lot of competition. It was it's getting faster every year, which I also think is really cool. The times are getting better and better. So, which I think is amazing for the Ivy League to show that you can kind of pursue athletics and academics at a super high level. But yeah, I loved all of that racing, and I loved racing short course yards. As a sprinter, make it even shorter, that's even better. So it was, I loved it.
And you made it to NC2As as well, to the national championships over there. How was that experience?
Yeah, so interesting. I actually made it my freshman year, and then I made it again my senior year. So kind of bookended my collegiate career with 2 NCAAs, which was interesting. I think my freshman year, there were 2 other girls that made NCAAs with me, so we had a bit more of a team going. But in both situations, it was quite last minute whether I'd made it or not. And I was definitely sort of on the fence. I think my senior year, I was a bit more comfortable knowing that I'd qualified a bit earlier. But I always find that double taper / like triple taper quite difficult to master. And that's still something I'm working on now. So I never really kind of performed my best at NCAAs. And I think personally being part of a team had such huge impact on my collegiate swimming career. Because I think towards the end of swimming in London and England, it becomes super individual. And that was something I was struggling with. And I wouldn't say I was falling out of love with the sport, but I was definitely struggling to keep going when we didn't have, I didn't have a team behind me the whole time necessarily. So to be thrown into that environment with lots of other people, that's really what I fed off of. And I loved being in that environment. So that's why NCAAs wasn't always my best competition of the year, because I didn't have, a huge team behind me. But it was an amazing experience to be there and see all those incredible athletes compete.
And you never felt, you never had a what if about perhaps having chosen to go to a Cal or a UVA or Florida or something like that, through that experience?
Yeah, no, I sort of did. But I also don't think I was really good enough to be considered for those back then. So I'd always be like, what if? But it's not like it was really an option, I don't think, at the time for me anyway. Yeah.
All right. So your collegiate career came to a close, 2019. At that point, were you? I mean, you've already said you're hoping to be a doctor. At that point, were you faced with that choice of medical school and maybe wind the swimming down, or or give it another shot. And I think, history shows that you decided to pursue swimming, but was that a difficult, choice to make at that point?
Yeah, so I graduated in 2019, and so I always kind of knew at that point I obviously had a very intense kind of academic career up to that point, and I was like, I think a year off wouldn't be the worst thing, and allow me to kind of apply to medical school. And so I was like, actually, this works out perfectly. I was like, I have a year, I can fully commit to swimming, go all in. Like, I'd never kind of been able to just focus on swimming. I'd always had school and exams and all that kind of stuff. So I was like, this is perfect timing. I have this 1 year, I can do med school applications, which still intense, but I was like, it gives me a bit more time to focus on swimming. So while it was, I think the choices like in the following years were a bit more difficult, because I kind of always knew I was going to take that year after I graduated to, if not swim, if I wasn't going to be swimming, I was going to travel. I was going to kind of do all those things that swimming never really allowed. But yeah, so making that decision at that point actually wasn't too difficult. It was more the kind of years following that then it was a bit more of a tough decision.
So having made that decision to have the year to focus on your swimming for a year, you moved on to the pro group at Tennessee. How did that come about? Because did you have a personal link, or was it just sending out emails and seeing who would take you?
Yeah, I mean, it was a combination of both. So I reached out to a bunch of coaches in the US. It felt like I was going through the whole recruiting process again. But that was really interesting, because obviously I had a very different perspective and different things of what I was really looking for. So that was through that summer. And then, so the coach that I had in London, he used to swim at Brown, and his coach at Brown was Matt Credich. And so I'd, known about him for obviously quite a long time. And even back when I was deciding Yale, Tennessee was kind of always in the back of my mind as sort of that what if. I wasn't properly like recruited there. I think they always kind of knew it was, I wanted to go like Ivy League, but so kind of when this opportunity came up, I was like, this seems like the perfect match. He knows my club coach back home. I knew him quite well already, and so I was like, you know what, this is perfect. I'll go all in, see what happens, and so that's why I ended up joining the Tennessee pro group.
And people in the UK may not understand how that works, because obviously you've got the university, the college squad, the NC2A swimmers, and then you've got this pro group who are postgrads, volunteer coaches, whatever it might be, people like yourself who are just committing to swimming. How do the two kind of relate to each other? I mean, are you swimming with the college guys, or are you completely separate?
Yeah, so it was kind of a combination of both, which again, was something that because I loved that in my collegiate career. Yeah, I loved being on a college team and being with a really big group. So kind of, I'd say half of our practices were with the college team, and then half of them were just the pro group. So it's kind of nice. You got a nice combination of both. It was kind of more professional with the pros, and then, you can still have that fun kind of team spirit with the college group.
And how did the kind of focus of training change though? Because obviously, short course yards is a very American thing. The college guys, everything they do is short course yards. The pros probably looking a bit more towards long course meters. So did was there a big kind of flip from going almost entirely short course yards when you were at Yale to now having to weave in that long course training?
Yeah, I think the transition was probably a bit easier. At Yale, we only had short course yard pools, so that was pretty much in the summer they'd convert one of the pools to long course, but most of the year round it was short course yards. But at Tennessee, it was 2 or 3 days a week the pool would be long course meters. So actually I was able to get in a nice combination of both, which I still think training short course yards is beneficial, first of all for sprinters, and then also it helps with all the technical stuff and the turns, starts, finishes, that kind of stuff. So yeah, it was a bit of an adjustment at first. Tennessee, they also like to do things a little differently, which they boast about a lot, I think, on social media and all that stuff. But yeah, they have a bit of an unorthodox kind of way of doing things, which was super cool. And I think that was really beneficial to me to kind of relearn how to do different things. So that was something that, yeah, I really loved about going there.
So you were a bit of a backstroker as well as a freestyler. So I'll ask this question. But when you went to Tennessee, were they teaching you top arm breakouts? I've had this conversation with others from Tennessee before.
Yeah. So I think by that point in my career, like I was needed to do some backstroke at Yale and towards like the last few years of my Yale career. But then after that, kind of because the focus was on year until the what I thought was a year until the Olympics, I was like, my best bet is that relay, is that 4x100 free women's relay. So I kind of shifted most of my focus onto freestyle. They did try to teach it to me. It did not go down well. But yeah, I mean, lots of different things at Tennessee. But yeah, I think, yeah. Sorry, I've lost my train of thought there. But yes.
It's quite all right. All right, sorry, that was a bit of a digression. So you're into training at Tennessee, and looking back, as we do now, it seemed like it was going really well. You won a couple of short course national titles over here in 2019, and then set a bag full of PBs at the Pro Swim Series in early 2020. And I mentioned Swimming Anoraks, who follow the American scene. Casey on this podcast had picked you as someone we should be watching heading into what we thought would be Olympic trials, because she could see your improvement. So were you feeling, until we all know what happened, were you feeling kind of that you had a chance of doing something at trials in 2020?
Yeah, which is, I mean, it's so frustrating to look back at it. But yeah, no, it was going really well, and I was kind of making all these steps forward that I kind of dreamt of and hoped would happen. And yeah, it was all looking really positive. I remember I went to the Pro Series in Iowa right before. It was like pretty much one of the last meets that went ahead, when we were all kind of talking about COVID and thought it would just be like a 2-week sort of thing. I remember we didn't even like rest for this meet, and I was going best times, and I hadn't gone a best time in my 100 backstroke in like 8 years. And I finally kind of got back down there, and I was so excited. And then I was like, this is perfect. Like, give me some rest and taper. And like, I was so fired up to kind of go fast at trials. And then obviously we all know what happened, and that kind of dream was put on hold.
And I guess at that point it was hot foot it back to the UK as get out of the US as while you still could, was it? And
yeah, exactly. I think for the first few days I kind of considered staying out there, and I was like, maybe if I was like Tennessee, it'll be fine. It's kind of in the middle of nowhere where we were. But then obviously then with like flight cancellations, and we started to realize this was going to be longer than just maybe like a few weeks. And so I pretty much like packed up my apartment within a few days and flew everything back home.
Right, and then and I think I saw on your Instagram that you were like many people in a wetsuit in a backyard pool with a bungee cord for the next however many months. It was frustrating.
Yep. Yeah, it was. I mean, I feel like everyone went through a similar thing. Yeah, it was definitely very frustrating. But it was also quite interesting because I was finding different ways to kind of work out. And I think that time sort of gave me an insight into what post swimming might look like. Because for the first like few months, I didn't have the backyard pool set up by this point. And so I was kind of running and trying to do like home workouts, like everyone in the country was, everyone around the world was. And I remember thinking to myself, like, oh, this is, if I'm done with swimming after this, like, this is what my kind of like workout regime and workout life is going to be like. And so I think it gave me that little window into kind of what it would look like. And yeah, then I kind of realized I was still hungry for more. And even though, obviously the timeline, everything had shifted, I was like, well, it was working. So like, why can't it still keep working? So then, we got the backyard pool up, and which was so cold, absolutely brutal. But got that going and kind of tried to start getting that feel back. Because obviously, you know that you lose your feel for the water so quickly. So just trying to get some semblance of that back. And then obviously an ISL kind of came around. And then we were back in the pool a little bit before then, but then, through to ISL and all that stuff.
Right. I wanted to ask about ISL. So 2020, you swam with Iron in
Mm-hmm.
Budapest. You were obviously with that pro group in the US. So, you had a little bit of profile, and you had your collegiate career to show as well. But how did you get yourself, on Iron's radar to get picked up by then?
That's a really good question, and honestly, I don't know. I think because a couple of the pros that I've been talking to, they'd done it the previous year, and they were like at Tennessee, they were like, Bella, you'd love it, like so fun, like just back to back racing. So I reached out to a bunch of the teams for season 1, but like didn't really get any responses. But again, like I wasn't, and I still don't think I am, but I wasn't really anybody. And then for the second season, I just honestly Insta DMs. I slid into those DMs and I got a couple of responses, but for ISL, it was definitely like who they needed. So if they needed a sprint freestyler to fill some relays, like that's where I could fill a spot. So, I was just super lucky, like really, really lucky that I needed someone. And that honestly, I think ISL, it's, I'm sure you've had many podcasts talk about it. It has its pros, it has its cons, but for me personally, it kept me in the sport. It kept me motivated. It gave me something to work towards. And for that, I will kind of always give it a lot of credit.
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess it gave you somewhere to swim as well for those, properly for those 6-8 weeks in Budapest as well, and train with some incredible swimmers on a 1 iron. Yeah, no, it was so cool, and so cool racing with them. Like, I remember, being able to train and race with like Katinka Hosu. I remember the first few sessions, I was like completely starstruck, and I was like fangirling way too much, and then by the end of it, we were like maybe friends, which was very exciting. So yeah, I mean, and I still feel like that at things like ISL. I'm like, these are my idols. This is so cool that I'm like on teams with them. So yeah, definitely a very cool experience. So 2021 rolls around and Olympic trials finally take place. Did you feel, like you were fully prepared for them? I mean, I know swimming was kind of back, and the guys certainly in the centres had been back in. I don't know whether you've been able to do any training, or as much training as you'd have liked, but were you just going to those trials to see what happened, or did you have aspirations of maybe doing something special? Yeah, I mean, I guess I always had that dream of doing something special, but unfortunately my lead up to it was far from ideal. I think I was back in the water probably like 2 weeks, a week and a half, maybe 2 weeks before Olympic trials. So yeah, got back from Budapest, and then obviously London or England went back into lockdown. And yeah, was unlucky. Unfortunately, like couldn't go train at a national centre at that time. So I was debated getting the backyard pool out again, but in January, I don't think that would have been the wisest decision. So yeah, that was I think the toughest point, because I was like, I can't train. I could see that I knew that other people were, and I was like, this is what I've kind of put so many of my other dreams on hold for, was this Olympics, now postponed Olympics, and I was like, and I can't do anything about it. So that was definitely a low point for me. So then going into that trials, my mind was just sort of all over the place, because before I was trying to block out the past however many months of not training and not being able to do what I knew I needed to do. But then, to even get up and get on the blocks to even race. And then afterwards, when it didn't really go as I had planned, I kind of then had to console myself using those thoughts, and I'd be like, okay, well, what were we really expecting that, I haven't been able to train, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it was tough. It was definitely a big like mental challenge more than anything, even just getting through the week of racing at Olympic trials, because I'm sure you're aware, but it was, it was the height. We were still kind of definitely in COVID. So lots of COVID protocols, couldn't really see, like my coach wasn't even able to go. So it was like locked in a hotel room, eating the hotel food every day, which it was not an ideal experience, but yeah, so my Olympic trials was not kind of everything I had dreamt of. I had dreams that I'd somehow pull out best times out of nowhere, but unfortunately that wasn't really the case. Well, no, I think people would have a lot of sympathy for the circumstances you were in. I mean, were you thinking that might be your swan song? Having had that year and the disruption to your training and everything. I mean, I know Andy Jameson on commentary kept telling everyone that's it. You were off to medical school as soon as they got out the pool, pretty much. But yeah. But you were you thinking that would be it?
Oh, definitely. After I took a long period of time out of the water and was kind of going through all of those thoughts. And, on one side I was like quite content with being done. I was like, I gave it my best shot. This, with all the circumstances, I also didn't swim as badly as I thought I was going to. So it wasn't absolutely tragic, but, it wasn't what I had wanted. So I definitely considered being done and calling it a day then. And getting on with medicine. And then, but then a part of me was also sort of bitter that I hadn't had this kind of perfect ending. And I always knew I'd be wondering kind of what if. So then kind of ISL like dragged me back in again, which seems to be a reoccurring theme throughout my career. But it was that summer that then I got drafted to DC Trident for that third ISL season. And med school, it was always it was always there. It was always going to happen. So I kind of pushed it back one more year, for when I got drafted to ISL. Just cause I was like, you know what, let's give it kind of one more chance. And I kind of wanted to finish my career also on my own terms. I didn't really feel that Olympic trials was really representative of what I believed I could do. So yeah, that's why. But I definitely very much considered being done after all that had happened.
I mean, you said how much you enjoyed the previous season of ISL, and I have to say, watching it, the DC Trident looked like they were having the best time of their lives in every match in that season. So that must have been a real kind of fillip to your enjoyment of the sport and your encouragement to keep going.
Oh, completely. I think I reached out to a bunch of teams and got very few responses back. But when I did get a response from DC Trident, I was like, these are the people for me. Because I was like, they're just kind of there for a good time, not necessarily a long time. But we actually ended up doing quite well. So that really kind of pulled me back into the sport.
Well, that brings us pretty much to this year, and obviously trials in the first part of the year covering all sorts of different events as things turned out. But Commonwealth Games, was that your main aim? Obviously the Worlds got thrown in very late, but presumably you were going to trials with the aim of getting on the England team for Birmingham. Yeah, completely. So I think it was the beginning of this year. I went back to Tennessee for like a month and a half, 2 months. Just because, again, I was like, it was working so well for me. I was like, why not? This makes sense. So I went back before Commonwealth trials. And they, again, like Commonwealth trials wasn't a terrible meet for me, but it didn't also go the way I kind of had planned it to, which was frustrating. But then obviously, very fortunately, made the Commonwealth Games team, which was, my ultimate goal. And I always said this, like, if I did make the team after that, I was like, I'm done. Like, this is it. Like, we can finally hang up the cap and goggles, and I'd walk away from the sport incredibly happy and satisfied. And then, so then Commonwealth Games happened, and again, like didn't necessarily fulfill like what I believed I could do and what my coaches thought I could do. So that was also, it seemed like a bit of a frustrating one, but like representing England at the home games was an experience I will never forget, and a feeling that was just unlike no other. It was just truly, truly incredible, but very frustrating that I couldn't kind of put together the races that I wanted to. And it didn't stop there, because you got to go to Rome as well for GB. Was that a surprise when you got that phone call or that email or whatever? Yeah, completely. Unfortunately, actually, I got COVID after Commonwealth Games, and so I couldn't go and compete at Europeans. But nevertheless, like, so honoured to have made it. And it was quite funny because my first my only European juniors was back in 2012. And then I had made a senior GB team. And then, the next team I made, senior GB team, was in 2022. So I was like, it's quite a poetic 10-year gap. So yeah, that was, incredibly fortunate to have made that team, and was honestly quite excited after Commonwealth to go and like kind of have another chance at racing. So I was like, maybe I just needed a bit more rest. I'm not really sure what it was. But then COVID happened, and unfortunately couldn't go. It's unfortunately the life that we're all in at the moment. But obviously you've moved to Loughborough now, training with Mel. That's right, isn't it?
Yes, yeah.
Yes. So how have you found that transition?
Yeah, well, so this was also quite a big surprise. So we were at the Mare Nostrum, one of the Mare Nostrum meets, and I think the one in Barcelona, and Mel pulled me aside and was kind of giving me all these stats for relays and the potential of the GB team, and she was talking to me, and I was like, cool, like, yeah, sounds good, like, you've got it covered. And she was like, I want you to be part of that. And I was like me? Like, you gotta be joking, because also we were not swimming well at these Mare Nostrum meets. And she was like, yeah, I think like you could be a big part of that relay. Like we need 8 girls to kind of help progress that relay. And I was like completely shocked. So she was kind of had put some ideas in my head that, you know, she might be considering me for something in the future. But again, in my mind, I was like, I've made Commonwealth. This was my main goal. I'm going to focus on that and see how that goes. So it was like a month or so before Commonwealth, she gave me a phone call and was like, do you want to join? You know, we'd love to have you at the National Centre. You know, we'll see what happens. Let's go all in. And at that point, my mind was kind of like, after Commonwealth, I had my place at medicine. I was like, I've pushed it off for so many years now. Like, this is happening. And so, yeah, the first phone call, I wasn't negative, but I was kind of like, I appreciate the offer, but I don't think this is the plan. But then leading up to Commonwealth, I went and did a few weeks in Loughborough, just to kind of try it out. And I was like, well, I may as well give it a shot. Like, let's see how it is. And loved it. It was, I mean, obviously it's an incredible group of people, you know, all the facilities, all of, you know, everything that you get when you're at the centre. And so then it was kind of right before, it was around Commonwealth time that I decided to kind of push off medicine one more year. Yeah, that's kind of how it all happened. So yeah, so Loughborough has been great. It's been, it's such a professional environment, which is something that it's not necessarily I'm not used to, but I think it's so specialized. Whereas in America, it was always kind of like, you know, there was sprint group, there was mid group, there was IM, distance, that kind of stuff. But this is super like, what does Bella specifically need in the gym? What does she need in training? And we do all of this like different testing, which is, yeah, something I've never really had before, so I'm so excited to see how that goes and how that, you know, progresses my swimming. But yeah, so that's been the move to Loughborough.
I mean, you talked about the women's sprint relay that Mel had mentioned to you. I mean, that does seem to be a group with massive potential, obviously with the 4 girls who swam in Tokyo, and then others like, you know, yourself and Evie Davis and 1 or 2 others coming through as well. That must be a really exciting sort of project to be part of.
Oh, completely. And I was like, even if don't end up being on that relay, I'm like so honoured that I was even considered. And if I can like help progress that group in the right direction, like I'm happy to kind of be a part of that. And that's what we've been having kind of these relay camps and stuff to kind of help get that group of girls together and help start getting that momentum and that excitement towards those relays. Because, you know, usually you get to kind of the big meet and they're like, oh yeah, like announce like this 4 are going to be up on this relay and there we go. Whereas now we want to get that group, you know, getting to know each other a bit better. Like obviously we've been on teams together, so we do, but really kind of getting everyone excited about the possibility of what we could do in Paris.
Well, it would be an exciting journey to follow for sure. But before we get to Paris and whatever else, you've got World Short Course Championships coming up soon. You're off to Australia in just a few days' time, I believe.
Yeah.
What are you hoping to achieve in Melbourne, just to round out 2022?
Honestly, it's tough because I want to go in with huge expectations, and I'm like, you know, changing program, like, you know, I've been given everything. This is going to be it. But I think, and I had a discussion with Mel about this, I think I'm trying to go in with low expectations because, you know, I have just changed a whole new program, new environment, new training, new lift, new everything. And it's all part of that, like, stepping stone in that process. So hopefully it's a step in the right direction. If I can improve on some of my times from ISL, because that was kind of the last time I properly raced short course. I mean, we did have short course nationals last year, but hopefully if I can, you know, put together some good races and good relays, which I think is going to be an exciting one in at Short Course Worlds, because we've got a small team, but I think we've got some really good relays within that. So I think that could be really exciting. But again, I'm trying to go in with more of just like taking in the experience and learning as much as I can. Because it's my first senior GB team. So we'll see how that goes. And then we're actually staying out in Australia because then we have a training camp January and February. So yeah, very lucky to be staying out there and kind of missing the cold winter months in England.
I'm not jealous at all, I'll be honest. No. All right, well, you already mentioned you've put off med school for another year to go all in again for swimming.
Yeah.
You know, that takes you through, you know, world champs and whatever else next year. Are you thinking of Paris at all? I mean, you mentioned it in the context of the relay there, or are you just taking things 1 year at a time at the moment?
I'm trying to take it 1 year at a time. And I think when I had this first conversation with Mel about what our plan was, she was like, you know, I'll give you a year and we'll try and do everything we can in this 1 year and see how it goes. And she was like, if it's not working, you're not enjoying it, you're not having fun, then she was like, you can go off and go to med school and be the best doctor ever. But she was like, if it is working, like, let's keep this momentum going. So yeah, trying to take it kind of one step at a time, because it's so easy to kind of get ahead of yourself and think too far in the future. But yeah, just trying to take it kind of big competition by big competition and hopefully work towards that.
Well, obviously, the next big competition is, as we said, World Short Course in a few weeks. So we will say best of luck for that one. I hope you get some good times on the board. But thank you ever so much for sharing your story. Really great to hear from you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
That's all for this edition of the Pullbuoy Podcast. We'll be back after World Short Course to review events in Melbourne. In the meantime, if you want to get in touch, you can find me on social media at Pullbuoy on Twitter or at Pullbuoy UK on Facebook or Instagram. Thanks for listening.
You've been listening to the Pullbuoy Podcast. For more episodes, visit www.pullbuoy.co.uk/podcast.